So, welcome everyone. Before we get started, I just want to say that we're in a Zoom webinar format. And so, what I see on my screen is a little bit different from what you see on your screen. But this session will be recorded. Being in the webinar structure of Zoom or feature of Zoom, only the panelists are seen. Only the hosts are seen on the video. Everyone's privacy will remain intact and confidentiality as well. So that's just a pre-housekeeping to let people know why that record is on. And yes, if you have any questions or anything like that, I am one of your moderators. My name is Colleen. You'll see me in the chat with GenNext from United Way. So you can send me a message if you have a question or anything like that. You also can message my co-moderator or MC for tonight, Jesse, from the Rainbow Collective. And yeah, we'll connect with you. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for attending this very interesting and exciting panel about the history of community within community in Thunder Bay. And tonight's event and why I'm excited is one, I love history, but secondly, we are going to hear from three individuals that have lived, contributed, continue to contribute, and can provide an amazing perspective and context to what things were like here in the GTBA, the Greater Thunder Bay Area, as potentially society progressed. We'll get into that definition a little bit later. So thank you for joining. I would like to welcome Jesse to bring some greetings, and also to although Scott, as you'll see on the screen there, may not be doing as much talking, please feel free to message him if there's any concerns, issues with technology, or questions, because the museum, we are grateful and thank you for hosting the platform and being involved in this event. And so, Scott, if there's anything you'd like to say after Jesse, just hop right in there. So without further ado, Jesse from the Rainbow Collective.
I'm Jesse. My pronouns are they, them. I'm Vice President of Inclusion from Rainbow Collective of Thunder Bay. So Rainbow Collective is just a new gender and sexual diversity group. We launched in March of this year. That's why I'll give you a brief intro, just so you know who we are. So we're just a supportive, empowering, and inclusive home for the gender and sexual diversity community, including those who are two-spirit and the intersex community with various forms of attraction and other intersecting identities within Thunder Bay and the rest of Northwestern Ontario. So our mission is to advocate for and promote gender and sexual diversity through our values of educate, empower, advocate, and social justice. So these last few panels, if you've been here for the last 2 days, are all about educating. And Colleen's going to give you a little bit more context about how this panel really came to be. But Scott, if you have anything to jump in and add, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Bradley. I'm the Executive Director of the Thunder Bay Museum, and it's certainly my pleasure to help host this panel discussion tonight on the history of these important communities within Thunder Bay. I think it's something that's important that we document, and I don't think is well represented in my museum just yet, but that's certainly something that we want to work on. And this is one of those first steps is making those that reach out to the community, to individuals, so that we can understand and we can cure ignorance, and we can fill our archives and our collection with important things that are representative of this community in the future. And so I'm really looking forward to tonight's panel to learn a lot and yeah, just become wiser. So thank you all for being here again.
And thank you, Scott, for being a partner with us, and Jesse as well. And I did mention from GenNext, United Way. Many people might be familiar with United Way itself, but the volunteer group that I'm a part of, why we're called GenNext is that we're the next generation. of volunteers, of philanthropists, of community members. And so we want to take action, we want to be able to give, and we want to be able to learn, with the focus of supporting the United Way, address those unignorable issues, and really make a difference in fighting poverty in our community. So for any more information about any of our organizations, please message us, reach out. And again, we're very excited to be able to put to be involved in this panel and have the opportunity to connect with our panelists and learn greatly from them. So moving into our panelists, some of you may be familiar with these rock stars that have, as I said, lived, contributed, continue to contribute, experienced the history, the context of rights and movements when it came to recognition, acceptance, equality, equity in the 2S LGBT QT community, plus. And so before we jump into asking a bunch of questions, and I'm nosy, so I'm gonna just keep asking. With our attendees, I would love to introduce you and then hear a little bit more about who you are. So who's the first person to go? We'll start with David because your mic is off. So David Belrose, welcome to our panel today. Thank you for coming back to Thunder Bay and doing what you do. David has been a part of the gay community in Thunder Bay for many years. He was involved in development, a community development in the 1970s, and actually helped found Gays of Thunder Bay in 1980. He has been a past board member and chair of AIDS Thunder Bay. He has a background in education. He has provided education workshops as a coordinator that focus on HIV and AIDS prevention. From 2008 to 2014, he was an outreach worker with Rainbow Health Ontario. In 2016, he published an autobiographical memoir, Answering a Different Call, My Queer brackets, Thunder Bay Life, and is a member of the Lakehead Unitarian Fellowship. So, David, welcome. And tell us a little bit more about yourself. So you lived in Thunder Bay. Where did you disappear to?
Well, I don't think I ever disappeared, but well, I go back a very long way. I was born in Port Arthur in 1942, and I've lived 67 of my 78 years in Thunder Bay. So it was when I graduated from high school from Port Arthur Collegiate back in 1961. I went off to university in Toronto, went to the University of Toronto and got a degree in modern history. At the same time, I was a member of the Canadian Army. It was through the regular officer training plan. So I spent about 11 years or 10 years away at that time, from 61 to 71. And after graduating from university, I did my time with the military until 1970, and then moved back to the new city of Thunder Bay in 71. And then have been involved with the community since then.
And that's amazing. And we're gonna discuss your journey and the impact that you've made. And that's very interesting about the military, that perspective, then versus now. So welcome back for a very long time. A new city, even though not really. Yeah, we're looking forward to discussing more with you in a little bit. Our next panelist, Michel Dumont. And yes, Michel. Michel is a queer Métis, two-spirit disabled artist. Quite the titles, and just secured Paris, an exhibit again in Paris through his art. He enjoys breathing new life into discarded vintage tile by making mosaic pieces. He also works in wearable arts using garbage, using packing tape. Is it Mylar, cellophane, LED lights, anything he can get his hands on and sees the beauty of. He's shown at Queer Landscapes, Queer Intersections, and at the John B. Ard in Toronto. And the Queer and Peace Vernissage. Say it for me.
Vernissage.
Yes, very good. Dawson College and Montreal. So you have to bear with me. It's dry in here, and I do trip on my words. But if you wait for me to get through it, our event's going to take way too long. So help me out along the way. So Michel, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Born in Thunder Bay, didn't stay, came back, drink the tap water. Tell us about your journey.
All right, so I was born in Nipissing Memorial General Hospital, and I was raised in a little hamlet called Herkit, about 80 kilometers east of the city. I left with my sanity barely intact at the age of 19. That's how I like to describe it. And one of the first people I bumped to in the city was David Belrose. And so I remember going over to his house. He was so gracious because I was trying to start another gay group on campus with Jen Metcalf and another Donna. And I was told that he had started, one of the first, queer, groups on campus. And so in 86, 87, I went over to his apartment, met him and his partner at the time, Andy, and he told me a bit of, his journey, at LU and, in Thunder Bay. And of course, bumping around the same groups, like I became the president of the Gays and Lesbians of Thunder Bay during my tenure, in the late 80s, early 90s. So we kicked around, the same places, partially because, successive groups, move on and new younger activists have to take up the cause. And so when I was 19, I went to the phone line. I came out to the phone line when I was 18. And then 6 months after, moving to Thunder Bay, I started volunteering at the Gays and Lesbians of Thunder Bay, their peer support phone line. And I went and looked at the records, from like a year previously, and it said, Michel, from Nipissing, very nervous. As I made that first nervous phone call, I think I may be gay, and, I'm wondering what that means. And so I then in turn, a year or two later, was answering that same phone call from nervous and scared men and women, trying to, understand their sexuality. And it was a journey to, service the community where there were massive gaps. There were no one else trying to help us. There was no one else in the community, no other organization that was trying to, service us. And we had needs, like we had to help these, people come out, other generations of people that you're okay, you're normal, and you'll be happy, It was, like I realized I had to become an activist. Like I never finished my degree, even the university was homophobic as hell back then. I had to deal with my own intergenerational trauma from being, a Ojibwe Two-Spirit. And so I realized being a human rights activist with the Canadian University Press, with the Ontario Federation of Students, the Canadian Federation of Students, et cetera, was where I needed to be. And I was one of the first groups that started with OPSU. OPSU had their, their gay group. When was that? The early 90s. And I was part of the first group that met nationally? No, provincially, that's OPSU. And so, yeah, it was wonderful, to meet all these activists who, had it together and, were on the ball and, were happy with themselves and their own skin. And so I had to spread some of that. If I was possible, if I was able to, I did.
Amazing. Thank you. And that is so the connection. You know what's interesting about Thunder Bay? Thunder Bay people find Thunder Bay people, right? No matter where we are. Or Thunder Bay is the meeting place of people from different communities bumping into each other. So that is so cool. So it's like a legacy building. Which brings me to our next panelist, Donna Nagy. Welcome. It's so great to see you, and thank you for being a part of our panel. So, Donna, born and raised here. You did dip out though too a little bit, and we'll ask about that. But born and raised in Thunder Bay, good old Hammersholt, Hammersholt High, Vikings,
Yes.
and then attended LU. We'll talk a little bit about your time in Edmonton, but what made you come back? And Donna has traveled to, is it Inukvik? And all
Close.
across, close. So, you know, again, we talked about and all across Northwestern territories, which is pretty darn cool. Donna, I have had the privilege of working alongside you in, you know, being an advocate, volunteering to the community through Thunder Pride Association, working alongside, and you've been part of the more recent builds when it comes to organizations and not-for-profits. Not that you haven't been all along the way, of course, but tell us a little bit more about your journey. Why did you leave? What brought you back? And where your focus is, where you are now. And sorry, before we continue, just for people to know, I am going to turn off my video because for those of us who know what a scratch CD is, and previous to that, I am coming in a little bit choppy and skippy. And so also housekeeping, if you're finding the video or audio is choppy on your end, turning off your video can be very helpful for smooth connection. So I'm sorry, Donna. But yes, tell us a little bit about your journey, Edmonton, coming back in Thunder Pride.
Thank you very much, Colleen. I'm going to go back just a little bit. Well, first off, I'm not as talented as my co-presenters here. I mean, these guys have got credits right up to yin yang. I'm not quite that good, but I might be close. Yes, born in 1954 in Fort William. So let's cover all the bases of Thunder Bay here. And did go to Hammersholt. But once I finished Hammersholt, I played for ladies fastball team. I was the only straight person on this team, unbeknownst to me. All right. Oh, and sorry, Jessie, my pronouns are she and her. Because you say that all the time and I always forget. So I'm playing on this baseball team, and we would go on tournaments, and there would always be one person that would come to my room, and we would play cards and we would watch TV, and I would say, like, why don't we go play, go with everyone else? No, they're busy. They're going to go do other things. And like, that was like, we went to a ball tournament every weekend for entire seasons. And I would always be stuck in the hotel room with my babysitter, making sure that I wouldn't find out about anybody. And one night, I was allowed to go out and to a do, or whatever you call them, at the ball games, at the ball tournaments. And these two girls were fighting. And I said, what are they fighting about? And my babysitter at the time said, no, you really don't want to know. I said, why are they so mad? They're really angry at each other. I mean, we play ball together. We're all friends. And Donna, let's go for a walk. And then I learned about the bees and the bees. That's how that started. Little unbeknownst to me, my wife, Thelma, had been following me even through high school. She was basically, what do you call that word? I forget the term.
Not stalker, but devoted.
Yes,
no, Donna and I work in corrections, so we joke about it. Yes, she was devoted in admiration.
Right, okay. I was engaged at the time to a male, and she knew where he lived, what he did, where we were, everything about me. And I was really impressed with her friend, not her girlfriend, but our friend, because she was in competition with me in basketball and volleyball and track and everything. So I knew who she was, but I had no idea who Thelma was. But anyway, that's how that started. And we had a club on Simpson Street called Back Street. I don't know if Michelle and David remember that one, that's where I actually met Thelma, or my wife. Can I say her name? I'll say her name. She's sitting right there. And from there, we met, I believe in 75, and I dragged her out to Edmonton, thinking that was the time when almost the whole exodus went to Edmonton. Like everybody went there. A lot of my gay friends went there. Most of them went to Calgary. We went to Edmonton, but they're in Alberta. And that's where we were going to make our million. The premier at that time really did not like Ontario people, but while we were there, we saw the real redneck side of people, like very redneck. I worked for the bank, and I applied for a transfer to Inuvik, and I got it, but it was mostly out of spite because Thelma and I were fighting because we had this great big huge candy store there now, and we had all of our pics of all of these different women that were just drop dead gorgeous compared to, well, not that Thunder Bay is bad, but there was a lot more out there to pick from. So we kind of ended up in a little bit of disagreement. So I applied to go to Inuvik, not knowing where it was, and I got accepted. So I land there for 3 years. I'm coming back after 3 years, and Thelma decides that Edmonton is not big enough for the two of us, so she moves back home to Thunder Bay. Well, short of it is we keep in touch periodically throughout, but I did move back in 2003 or 2002. And then I wanted to be part of the gay community. I did not want to live like I did in Alberta, behind closed doors, hiding, and all the rest. I like the freedom that Ontario had for me. That's in a nutshell.
Awesome. And what a beautiful love story that mirrors no, I'm just joking, series on Netflix. But and I think, and anyone on the panel, please feel free to jump in, is that your stories highlight a very common theme, starting in Thunder Bay, then leaving for space, for like, it's one of the things that I tell the 5-year-old who's like, I didn't know this. Well, how do you know something until you know something? And leaving is sometimes what we do to really find ourselves, especially in a community where even if cognitively we don't realize that something's not clicking, that's where the struggle is, the internalization, the pretending, the unawareness comes from. And so to leave and come back. And so Michelle, hop in. Sorry, I'll stop.
Pauline, it's very true. There's a lot of commonality with a lot of gay people in Thunder Bay. Exactly that they leave and they come back. Sometimes they come out before they leave. And I mean, I met many university students, I met a lot of young people who, came out a week before they moved to Toronto or, Winnipeg, et cetera. I came here at the age of 19. And so I was, not really burdened by, having family living close. I moved, 80 kilometers, into the city. I was able to have the freedom to come out of the closet in the middle 80s, where, some, individuals found it more difficult. Like there were so many like pressures of family and, culture that would, inhibit people from coming out of the closet. When I first came to the city, there were only 2 other gay niche. That was shocking, to me, that there was only a couple. Everybody else moved. And so they moved so they could, live their authentic lives. Right. And so I kind of decided that I was going to stay here in Thunder Bay and make the best and try to fight for human rights. Right. And luckily I met wonderful people like the other people on the panel. There were some hardcore, activists who said, hey, my love, the love that dare not speak its name is not wrong. And that, we decided that, okay, so we need to have safe spaces, and we need to nurture, our youth and let them know it's okay.
Yeah. And so David, reading your bio and hearing your journey, for you, you left Thunder Bay, made some realization, if I understand kind of your story of coming out, and then brought that back here to Thunder, or did I get that mixed up? So,
Okay. When I graduated high school, I hadn't figured out who I was yet. In the 1950s, it was not really something that was discussed, and the process of denial can be really helpful in working through. And I mean, if I'd figured out I was gay when I was in high school, I don't think I would have signed up for the regular officer training plan. But at any rate, so it was at university in Toronto that I, finally had to admit to myself, okay, I'm gay, and at the same time say, okay, this is fine. I'm all right. I'm good with who I am. And after graduating from high school, I was serving in the Canadian Army or the Canadian Armed Forces in the late 60s. But it was in 1969 when, of course, there was the Stonewall riot. But even before that, the Canadian government decriminalized homosexuality, at least for those of us who were over 21. And at that point, I thought, oh, well, maybe I could stay in the Army for a while. But immediately after the government changed the rules, the Army or the military changed the rules and said that now I could be kicked out of the military because it was conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. And so I knew that, of course. So after in 1970, I decided I was at that time at Mobile Command headquarters in Montreal, and Montreal was a good place to be for most of a year. But after that, I moved back to Toronto for a time, and but then applied to Lakehead University and to come back and work on a master's degree, which I never did complete. But nonetheless, I moved back to Thunder Bay, and so I've been here most of my life since then. And the thing was that the 1969 decriminalization was a huge thing, and it made me very favorable to Pierre Trudeau and the government at the time. But it's only been in the recent years that it's amazing how ignorant one can be of what's going on, because that was the same year that the government, Jean Chrétien, produced the white paper, which would have basically wiped out Indigenous rights completely. And so, it took me decades to really become aware. I was so focused at the time on my own issues of, of being gay and what that meant in the country, that it's only in recent years that I finally became aware of what the government was trying to do to our Indigenous population. And of course, we're now at least facing the issue, and I think we're going to be dealing with a lot of truth over the next period of time before we can get to any kind of reconciliation. Sorry, I had to throw that in because those are, those dichotomies that are conflicts that happen. On the one hand, something great, and on the other hand, something terrible.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like, and for I think it's Glee. Any Glee fans, big hair, poor choreograph, right? We kind of get lost in, finally make some achievements. And it's hard because within our own communities, and especially racialized communities like the Black community, so much diversity, but it's all of us that need to all be pushing together. One of us taking a step forward, if you can call that, or Michelle, how did you describe it before? Is it 2 steps forward, 1 step back? Sometimes the process is that collaboration. And so talking a little bit more, and thank you for sharing your experience around what happened in 1969 and then the system of the military. That was the don't ask, don't tell kind of policy we hear from the States, but the fact that, no longer decriminalized, but we're going to fire you, you don't get benefits, dishonorable discharge, anything like that. And so my question to our panelist members are, and we're going to get a little bit more into history, thinking of, leaving Thunder Bay, and Donna, you had mentioned the exodus to the west at that time. Y'all came back. So what's I guess inspired you? Donna, we heard a little bit what brought you back, but you made the choice to come back to a community that hasn't really grown necessarily in size, right? And we hear about families, and Michelle, you had mentioned my love is okay. So what made you come back and take a chance on this little place called Thunder Bay? Donna, go ahead.
Okay, I wasn't sure who you were asking. For myself, I was just tired of the redneck. I was tired of hiding, tired of not being able to be free. When I lived in Alberta, I found, well, the big difference between Alberta and Ontario, and I use this quite often, is if you're in Alberta, you stand there and you say, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. You come to Ontario and you stand in front of a bunch of people and you say, who are you looking at? Don't look at me. Who are you looking at? It's so different. And I born and raised with being yourself here and versus being in Alberta and being judged constantly. So I wanted to come back home and I wanted to really get involved with the community is what I wanted to do. But going back to David's one point, how my parents found out about myself is that it hit the newspaper. And I believe it was in 1974, there was a big ad about those kind of people are in our city. They're here. And my mom and dad read the paper faithfully. My brother, Brian, who you all know, he comes in from the bar one night and mom and dad say, Brian, is Donna like that? And he said, yep. And he walks away. So my brother's still clear. Donna is now labeled.
And I can't even imagine. Yeah, wow. Yeah. 1974 wasn't that long ago. Like if you think about it. I usually am not lost for words, but wow, that must experience. I can't imagine. But yeah, so Michelle, but you moved up 80 kilometers, Nip Rock High. What? No, you moved up 80 kilometers, traveled a little bit, and then still came back to Northwestern Ontario, doing what you're doing now in Thunder Bay. So how come? Why?
Okay, so I guess I did move away. I moved to Alberta for a summer. Was it 96? Yeah, it was 96. So I went to.
Everyone was doing it at the time, apparently.
Well, kind of. I went to Montreal for the referendum, and so Chrétien allowed everyone in Canada for $200 return to fly to Quebec to keep Quebec in the country. And so I went to the gay bars in Montreal for that weekend for $200 return. So and I met a wonderful Calgarian. I know, not a Frenchman. I met a Calgarian, and so I moved to Calgary with him. That was an eye opener because we were holding hands in Montreal, we were holding hands in Calgary, and people came up to us, even in 96, and congratulated us for holding hands during the day. But when we were walking downtown Calgary, like 4th and 4th Ave, we were holding hands in 96, a police officer grabbed his holster of his gun and flipped up the snap, and he scowled at us that he wanted to shoot us for openly holding, hands with each other. But at the same time, we were always thanked and appreciated. Men and women would come up to us and say, congratulations on being out. And that was only in 96. So, I decided to come back, partially because I needed to get sober, and, moving to Calgary wasn't, it wasn't going to help me get sober. I needed to get sober back home. And so I ended that relationship, and thankfully he's still a very good friend. We still keep in touch, and I decided I needed to get my own crap together. And realistically, a police officer here locally said, no wonder you fought for human rights, Michelle. You didn't have any of your own. And so coming from my own background with intergenerational trauma stemming from, my mother's Indian day school experience, I had to, get my shit together. And I fought for human rights, partially because I didn't have any growing up. And I understood how important it was, like something so intrinsic as our sexuality. People expected, us to change and modify our behavior and, hop into heterosexual, relationships. And, some of us were not going to do that. And so we were those square pegs being forced into round holes, and we weren't going to do it. And so, I decided to, get sober, and now it's been 24 years of being sober. And realistically, we've had to educate. I had to educate as I went in this city, I was one of the first out, gay parents to, adopt a child in the city. It was not easy. Being the first is always not easy, right? And so I found that I was a walking safe sex pamphlet. And of course, I would visit David at, the AIDS committee because he was the educational outreach fellow. And I would get, pamphlets to take to conferences, and I would get, all this information from the AIDS committee. And then at the same time, I would be going to the bar and I'd be taking, all these straight kids home, and I'd be showing the Italian boys who would scoff at, putting a condom on. And I'm like, the condom fits on my arm, it'll fit on you. So, yeah, I did advocacy day and night, even half cut.
And so, opportunities to educate when people, maximizing your time. But let's talk a little bit about your commitment to community. So this is for all the panelists. But actually, I would like to start with David on this because Michel, you just shared a little bit of experience about people congratulating you being the first in the community to adopt and whatnot. And so David, for you, what was the experience like? You are the first individual or part of the first team to begin I'm sorry, I forget the name, the group, Gays of Thunder Bay. You were around for the bathhouse raids in Toronto. You're there for Thunder Gay magazine TV show in syndication. And so can you give us a little context when those significant things were happening, when you're, part of the beginning of grassroots movements? What's the experience like to maybe have people congratulate, or how did you take the chance to start? That's what I'm asking. Like, what was it like? You were in the military, then they changed the policy, and what is that experience like to live it, to be here? So sorry, I don't know how to ask it better.
Well, okay, we have to go back a little further than Gays of Thunder Bay, because it was when I left the military, I knew that I wasn't going to hide who I was anymore, because it takes an awful lot of psychic energy to barricade off a whole part of yourself and to try and avoid sharing that with other people. At any rate, so I knew that when I came back to Thunder Bay, I knew I would, and it took time to meet people. I can recall actually going to an event at Hammersholt High School, and there were 4 guys sitting there, and we sort of nodded to each other afterwards, and that was it. But then I went to have a beer at the Fountain Room, which was a major bar at the time in the Prince Arthur Hotel. It took up what it was the whole front of the hotel at that point, and 2 of the people were there, and so that was my first connection with people in the community. But by 1973, the Northern Ontario Women's Centre had started, and they were, operating with women. But in 1974, while I was still a graduate student at Lakehead University, we had a visit from Gerald Moldenhauer, who was the proprietor of Glad Day Bookshop in Toronto. And so he came and talked, and so that was an impetus for me to start the first campus club in the city and we called it Lakehead Gay Liberation. Unfortunately, it only lasted for about 6 months. After the end of the school year, everybody else that was involved practically all moved off to Toronto. But that was the starting point. And then that next year, 75, from 75 to 80, the community gathered at the Backstreet Athletic Club that Donna has mentioned, and that was great. But it gradually fell apart. So in 1980, we knew that by the fall of 79, I know there were a group of us meeting trying to figure out what we could do in terms of education and that. And so in 1980, once again, there was the fortunate situation of somebody coming from Toronto. The Coalition for Gay Rights in Ontario had funding to hire an outreach worker, Robin Hardy, who came to Thunder Bay. And so we set it up. We had a meeting on a Friday evening, I think, probably a party. Yeah, we had a big party at my house on a Saturday night, and then on Sunday we had the meeting, and we established Gays of Thunder Bay. And so that was the start. And we asked people to make a donation, and we raised enough money to be able to hold a dance at the former Ukrainian labor temple. And that generated enough money to allow us to, without any support from any level of government, to eventually get to monthly dances at the Ukrainian labor temple. And that became, for most of the 80s, that became the place where people gathered to meet. So it was just something that needed to be done, and I happened to be in the place at the time, and so if it has to be done, I guess you just do it.
So hearing the story, the journey, the multiple association efforts and whatnot, I'm interested because I found a quote from the Thunder Bay Post and like an early edition of the Chronicle Journal that says Thunder Bay has been slower than the rest of the country creating, it references citywide pride events. And so Thunder Bay, it's funny when, I find it, not being a Thunder Bayan originally, but I drank that tap water 20 years ago and I'm never turning back, lead and all. And what's interesting is that some people might describe Thunder Bay kind of like 1970s with 2021 technology, a little behind the times, and we've heard the term redneck and whatnot used. Yet hearing the experiences and the involvement that you've had, would you agree that we're behind the times, or how would you describe your experience, through the different stages of, I lightly use the term progress for lack of a better description, or change, with regards to, hi Kitty, rights, legislation, all that kind of stuff, being in Thunder Bay?
Okay, there we go. See, hey, if I'm going to talk, I want to be recorded. At any rate, and I can remember, if you look at that restaurant now, you'll see there's a bricked up window. It was apparently shot out. And I can remember being in there one night where there were people outside with 2x4s, and there was a kind of a pitched battle going on. Being a devout coward, I stayed inside the bar and drank instead of joining the fight outside. So that that was then. But you move up to 2009 and you have Jake Renard being gay bashed, and but by then it resulted in a huge rally, and out of that came Thunder Pride in 2011. So so things have moved slowly in Thunder Bay, but I think moving slowly was actually good. We never really had the kind of confrontations, or at least public confrontations. I mean, not until '94 when that was the first major protest, when the protest happened at Lynn McLeod's office. So things moved slowly, but I can remember in the mid '80s a police car pulling up in front of the Ukrainian labor temple, and a young man got out of the back seat, and he came in, and I said, "What was that all about?" And he said, "Well, I was looking around, and he stopped the police car and asked them where the gay dance was." and they drove him to the Ukrainian labor temple. So probably a much different approach than it would have been if it had been some Anishinaabe person.
Can I jump in for a sec? Is that all right?
Oh, of course.
So in '93, I was arrested for being gay, and that was not pleasant. Mind you, dealing with the police has never been, easy. And so it's either because I'm male, it's because I'm, a punk, or it's because I'm queer or whatever. And of course I wear, like gay t-shirts. And so I'm very visibly, identifiably, queer. And so you can pick your, it's most likely that. I mean, I've been stopped at the border with my son. They went through family photos. The Canada Services went through all my family photos on my laptop to look for child pornography because I was a gay parent. So they presumed I was just going to bring that into the country. It took, I was at the border, I can't think, 9 hours. Almost 9 hours. They had a child psychologist from Toronto, sift through my laptop to make sure everything were family photos. It was, to have such scrutiny being an out gay male parent, and that was not that long ago. That was, the early 2000s or the middle 2000s. And so dealing with, the police, et cetera, it's, I had an all men's night in my basement rec room, which was kind of like a dungeon. And so I had all these adult men in the basement. It was New Year's. It was 20 minutes to, midnight, and 3 or 4 police officers came into the house. And so they came in and there were 9 men in my basement. And we just thought they were coming to the party because they looked like everybody else. We were all wearing, police boots. We were all wearing various, leather uniforms, etc. And so I just invited them in. Then I found out that they were the police, and they were asking if anybody was being held against their will. The youngest, we had to pull out our ID. No one was really drinking. People were doing other things. And the youngest person was, 27 at the party. They then went into my son's bedroom upstairs, and they checked his pulse to see if he was alive. And I'm like, you think I would kill my son so I could have a birthday party? Luckily, my son slept through that whole experience. I told the police, where were you the night I had 20 lesbians in my house? Where were you the night when I had, 60 straight people, in my house? The night I have 11 gay men, you're here? And so I was livid. They did leave. I argued them out the door because I was sober, and I'm like, look, you can't prove that I'm impaired. My son was, sleeping. My friends were in the basement. We were having a party, so to speak. There was no alcohol. They left just before midnight. I'm like, you have real, New Year's Eve parties to crash. I got an apology 4 months later from one of the police officers on Anti-Homophobia Day. And he said, he showed me the record of, the night, and that, there was no, inquiry, there's no permanent record. And he apologized. And that floored me that I got an apology from the police, because it was highly suspect, that why they were there in the first place. It was quite the experience, but at the same time, I realized that, the fact that he apologized on Anti-Homophobia Day, that is something, was changing. Like, the younger police officers were not like their older kin.
Wow, and it's that you were profiled, right? Essentially, and many communities experience that, unfortunately, but then not too much after that to receive that apology. And it's like that 1970s technology, 2021, and the pace of kind of how things have shifted. And so, Donna, what was your experience like pre-Edmonton to when you returned and became involved with Thunder Pride and the community? Like, how was that? Like, how would you describe that experience, that change for yourself?
Well, when I was here before we went to Edmonton, I felt it was very vibrant. We had a lot of I was very much into sports, so our whole ball team, was all together, and we were all here. We would all go to Backstreet every weekend, and when I first moved out, well, after my brother told on me, my dad decided that it was time for me to go talk to the priest and go talk to a psychiatrist. That's what I should be doing. And I could, being the oldest, he wasn't sure how to handle any of this, but I remember him sitting beside me and he was just shaking. He was so mad at me. Which was fine. I moved out, and then later, my brother moved in with me because my dad found out that he was gay as well, and that didn't work out so well. But I'll never forget the one night at a couple of the girls were running the door at Backstreet, and Thelma and I decided we weren't going to go that night. We were at home. I got a call from one of the girls, and she says, "Donna, do you have a brother?" I said, "Yeah, I've got two." She says, "Well, is one really, really tall and really skinny?" I said, "Well, they both kind of are." I said, "Why?" "He's here." I said, "I'll be right there." I had no idea yet that he was gay. That's how I found out he was gay. He tells my mom and dad from the newspaper, but I have to find out while he's at the bar. That was hilarious. But can't remember where I was going with this. Oh, but when I left here, there was lots of people, there was lots of action. And then it just seemed like everybody did go to Alberta because that's where the jobs were, that's where the money was. And then when I came back, it was almost like a ghost town. Honestly, I thought, like, I looked up, I made a few phone calls, and most of you know Cynthia Olson. I found her. I think somebody gave me her work number, and I phoned her and I said, "I would like to join a gay club." And she says, "Who is this? How did you get my number?" Well, and I told her, and I thought, well, I'm looking to join something. And so she invited me to the next meeting, and that's how I become involved. But trying to find somebody when I got here, like in 2002, was like a ghost town as far as LGBT. I couldn't find anybody. I didn't know where David and Michel were.
I live in Toronto. No, I don't know. But that's interesting. When listening to the choice to come back and how the community changed so much. When I hear a little bit about, well, not a little bit, when you share about the coming out, the acceptance, the fact that there's these backdoor clubs, to compare to profiling newspaper ads taken out to disclose or try to target or identify to the movement of Thunder Pride and where we are today. And the fact that now we have multiple organizations, right, that are focused on supporting the 2S LGBTQ plus communities. So it's very interesting. And David, thank you for your perspective about, yes, I think that the timing was good. It was slow, and then it kind of just picked up. Michel, you got an apology from a police officer, to Donna jumping on an association, a board. So that quote depends on who you ask about, if we're behind the times or, on track or ahead. But thank you for sharing the experience and the reality of situations, David.
I don't think we should try and compare ourselves with any other community. Every community is going to be different, and that's just through the 1980s. I mean, Gays of Thunder Bay, we started in 1980, but by the mid 80s, of course, AIDS became a dominant, and so a group of us that had to become the focus, and we started the AIDS Committee of Thunder Bay because prevention, education, support, and advocacy. And because nobody else was doing it, so we had to step up and do it. And that became then the focus for me for until I retired in 2007, really. But all the while, and you mentioned education. Actually, I mean, I have never taught except, well, I was a TA at LU for a while, but I was the education coordinator at the AIDS Committee of Thunder Bay from 1990 to 2007. So, and all my work always included work around LGBT issues. And showing my age, I used the abbreviated LGBT because that was what we used it with, and we used that with Rainbow Health, and that's why I just called my book My Queer Thunder Bay Life. It's much simpler than trying to use these lengthy acronyms. Maybe I'm an anachronism. And anyway, so, and from, from 87 to 91, there was the weekly television show on, at that time, McLean Hunter cable TV. And so I didn't have too much to do that except being a guest occasionally. And I worked camera often doing that show. And but you mentioned the bath, sorry, I'm switching topics here because I remember you mentioning the bathhouse raids, and I have a story around that because Michael Sabota, who is really he's been a major factor in as well, and certainly with the establishment of the AIDS Committee and AIDS Thunder Bay, he was the primary driving force there. But Michael and I took the train to Winnipeg to go to the Manitoba Theatre Centre to see a production of Bent, the play by Martin Sherman. It involves two inmates in a concentration camp, and they line up and actually have, side by side, and they're sort of having phone sex, except it's fence sex, I guess you'd call it. At any rate, it's a very powerful and moving play. And we returned home on the train, and the next morning was when we heard about the bath raids in Toronto. And so it was this, suddenly all of this stuff, this play set in the Second World War, and suddenly we have the police launching this massive raid in Toronto. And there wasn't a lot that we could do about it here, but we did issue a media release that we sent out to condemn the raid and encourage the, things to change. So so in a small way, at least we made our voices heard.
Thank you. And that leads me to ask, all of our panelists. Yes, I mentioned the bathhouse raids, but we also had a local protest in '94 that some of our panelists were a part of, talking about finding boys. But in your perspective and your experience, what did it mean to you when things like decriminalization, or partial decriminalization of homosexuality happened? When, under the Canada Charter of Rights and Freedoms, not being able to discriminate against sexual orientation was added. When, the Prime Minister gave a formal apology in 2017, or the chiefs of the police chiefs of Canada in 2020, when those pieces happen, what was your experience? How was it locally, and what does that mean to you? Especially because we, and well, I'm not going to say we, some of us are on the beneficiary. Like we didn't contribute to necessarily those fights. We get to benefit from those fights, and to see that happen in your lifetime and know that contribution that you made. What did that mean for you?
I have a really short statement on that. We were not here. We were in Edmonton with the Rednecks, so nothing really changed. But even though we were recognized and we were made legal, it did not make us safe. So that's kind of what my wife and we talk about all the time. Yeah, everybody knows about us, but make sure the alarm is on when you go to bed, and like, okay, don't go out at night, kind of thing. And being female, okay, heaven forbid should you hold hands, that kind of thing. So we're here, we're legal, and we're supposed to be recognized. Okay, we are, but I don't feel safe. And David, you can probably tell a lot more.
See, I think there's several stages to the advances in movement. I mean, first of all, 1969, that was the culmination of all the civil rights activity, the feminist movement in the 60s, and then finally the decriminalization. So that was the first thing, and that opened things up for us to begin to make a difference. Then with the 1982 adoption of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but the portion of it that applied to sexual rights and homosexuality didn't come into effect until 1985. So but that also opened things up somewhat, and that was why there was the move in Ontario to recognize same-sex relationships, and Lynn McLeod and the Liberal Party had agreed to support that, and then turned around and voted against it. I was out of town when the protest happened at Lynn McLeod's office, but when I came back in and saw Lakehead Living and this color photo on the front page, it was like fantastic. People felt comfortable enough to be out in public and make that kind of a protest. So it was clear to me that this was, of course, by 94, so it was still later, but it was a sign that things were moving ahead, and I thought, oh, this is fantastic. And what else? Oh, and to be honest, apologies from prime ministers and other people in recent years. We've had a lot of apologies for a lot of different things, and for me, especially at this stage in my life, it's if there's no action accompanying it, then it's pretty meaningless.
Lip service is simply lip service to be humored or whatnot. And Michelle, I'm going to ask you your experience, but we kind of had a discussion about this around land acknowledgements and whatnot, and the implications, and what it means to be genuine, and recognizing that. And so, building off of what David has just said, his perspective of like apologies again, action. And I think the three of you walk the talk of that, is what makes the difference. What was your experience? Like, how did it feel? 94, how did it feel? 95, how did it feel? With rights, or again, quotation, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, being loud, proud, and significant, I guess.
All right. So in '86, who was it? Was it Helen Cherney? No, it was one of the Ontario provincial ministers had declared that same-sex orientation was no longer grounds for discrimination in the Ontario, legal code or whatever it was. All right. So I remember going to the office, which was now it's a Black Pirates pub, but back then it was a hippie, blues bar, and half and half sometimes would be gay and lesbian. And that night, when the grounds for, you couldn't get fired anymore, supposedly, for being gay anymore in Ontario, we were and that night. At the same time, people, with the AIDS crisis, people ran back into the closet, right? And some of them stayed there forever. Every time that there's been some kind of development, and then in the early 90s with Lynn McLeod, my partner at the time was a teacher, and he knew Lynn McLeod personally. We got Lynn McLeod's Christmas card gift that year. When she did the whole flip-flop. And I was actually in Toronto at, what was it? It was the Buddies in Bad Times Theater, and Leah Delaria, had a whole, joke and had a costume with a flip-flop, just tore a strip into Lynn McLeod. And I'm like, you don't know her, but it's funny. Yeah, I was not impressed with her. I was not impressed with lots of things. I missed that protest, but I had been to so many other protests over the years, like not just protest, but, mourning, like with, what was it? It was the December 9th. It was the massacre of the female engineering students in Montreal. That march, that morning, procession was heavily gay and lesbian. There were so many lesbians at that, march. And so we inadvertently, our sexuality makes us activists. If we want to love who we want to love, we have to fight for our rights. And so, and we fight for those who can't, right? Or those who, for one reason or another are, unable to, take the risk to come out. And so, oh God, for me, I mean, I gave up, having a university degree. I gave up, a career path. Like I didn't become a teacher because my mouth was just too loud. And I just couldn't, hop back into the closet like so many other, people for their profession. And that was just not going to be me. And so, yeah, I didn't have as much to lose. Like even when I started working in the early 90s, I started working at Avenue 2. So one of the developmentally challenged, service provider agencies in town. I think it was 94 or something. I made a human rights complaint with work because they didn't want me to say I was gay. They didn't want me to even say the word in the office. And so I got educated, or I got the OPSU, sent me to Toronto. They sent me to human rights training, and they're like, you can say you're gay, Michel, at work. And so I then forced human rights training on like 80 individuals. I got it incorporated, 15 minutes in the 1,000-hour, training package that they had to like spend 15 minutes on the word gay and lesbian. And so, I had my own little battles, trying to, and the thing is, I didn't have a house mortgage. So there were like 10, 11, gay and lesbian people who were secretly thanking me, for being out and forcing this human rights education on their workplace because, they had mortgages. They couldn't risk being out at work. And so I remember meeting them, on the slide in the lunch break room, and, a bunch of, gay and lesbians came out to me and said, thank you for doing this. And I'm like, no problem. I was young and stupid, but I didn't have a mortgage, and I could stick my neck out when other people, couldn't.
And just listening, allegedly comes to mind. So legislation allegedly supports this, practices around or that prohibit non-discriminatory, firing at work, that kind of stuff. So there's legislation that says this, but then continuing to have to fight to have it implemented and to have it
Exactly.
brought in legislation into community is a whole other thing.
I have to tell you one other great story that's affiliated with that. Years later, one of my coworkers came to me and said, Michel, because you came out at work, we did not kick out our lesbian teenage daughter. His wife was about to kick out his lesbian teenage daughter out of the house for coming out as gay, but because he had met me at work and had the training at work, he got his wife to calm down, and they accepted her. So there is cause and effect.
Well, I was on mute there. I was like, and that's amazing. And that kind of brings us to break. And so on that note, and thank you for sharing that story, Michel. For our attendees, for our panelists, we're going to take a little 15-minute breather, stretch the legs, because in today's events, all of us are sitting in front of a camera, sitting, smoking, they say. I'm quite comfortable though. No, but 15 minutes from your time-telling device. When we come back, we've heard the journey. We've shared some stories. We've gained some insight about the history of Thunder Bay and the journey and experiences of our panelists. We invite attendees to ask questions, either in the group chat or directly to myself or Jesse or Scott. But when we come back, we're going to focus on what are you doing now? What do you see? Considering some of the gains GAINS. I know I have a little bit of speech impediment, not gangs, like gang signs, but games that you have experienced, that you've seen. What does the future from your perspective look like? And we're going to do some Q&A. So 15 minutes. I have 8:45 on my Lenovo, and we'll come back at the top of the hour with our panelists to learn and hear some more. Thank you so much thus far. And please, everyone, be mindful of your mic and your mute function as we enter break.
So am I shocking, Jesse?
Okay, so Jess, one, Paris, you have to be. Secondly, I don't know, can everyone hear our conversations? I don't know how webinar works, so
Hi, Colleen.
Hi.
Colleen,
Yeah,
we are still live. If I stopped us, we would kick out all our attendees, which we don't want to do. So we are still live.
so Scott, you said you can edit, right?
Yeah, I can edit all this out. So if you need to just have a.
So Scott, I think I'm really glad that the museum's having participation in this. I was a history major at LU in 86 and 87, 88. And so, yeah, this is wonderful that the museum's taking, part in this. I mean, a lot of us, carry ephemera, or we carry, like t-shirts and stuff that really should be donated to an archive. And if we lived in a larger city, and I've seen the Queer and Lesbian or Gay and Lesbian Archive in Toronto, and they have notes of like, gay and lesbian meetings in Thunder Bay, because we don't have a repository here in Thunder Bay, for those, community, note takings, or, we've been documenting our own lives, right? In lieu of, a public archive that should be doing it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really is, our museum is supposed to be representative of the community. And when we fall short of that, like I'm learning as we're doing a study of our collection to revise our collecting plan, then we have a lot of work to do. And so, I have a lot of personal legwork to meet people like you and David and Donna, and to establish those relationships and make those solicitations. Like we need to have stuff from going back to the late 19th century, whatever we can find. That documents, this portion of Thunder Bay that is underrepresented in our collection. So yeah, those things that you're hanging on to, your T-shirts, your protest memorabilia, your stuff from the bars. I want to see stuff from those bars because everyone loves architectural history, and why not have that part, as well. But yeah, this is definitely something we need to do, and it's core mission. It's not just like nice to do and put on the side as a feather in our cap, but core mission.
Scott, I have to say I'm sorry. I donated my papers to the LU archives, so sorry about that.
No, you're totally forgiven. I mean, there's definitely quite a bit of stuff that appears in the LU archives that could be in our museum. But the fact that you went to school there kind of means that's appropriate for that to be there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I may still have a few things around, and if I do, when you start collecting, I'll be glad to share them with you.
Yeah, I mean, I will start taking donations tomorrow.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, and and when we go to start developing more content and things in the future, when we're revising our long-term exhibit plan, we'll make note that some of that stuff is at LU archives, and talk to our good partners and friends over there to to get a little access to that if need be.
Mm-hmm.
So no worries.
Scott, are you looking for people's history recollections? Is that what you're looking for?
All of it. So, personal papers, letters, correspondence, photographs, and certainly at some point, we're gonna probably look at doing a larger kind of oral history program mean, obviously we'll save this recording, but then we're going to look at, documenting things that maybe aren't easy to document through what still exists. So obviously those oral histories are going to be really important, but definitely, physical three-dimensional items, as archival items, recordings, even, artwork and doodles and all those sorts of things. They're all important because they all show a big holistic picture. And it's the same thing we would do for any community.
And that's where this whole kind of event came from, was them reaching out to Rainbow Collective. And then, we're getting your information right now. And this is the start of us kind of promoting, can we get more people, more information? So psych.
Are you interested in, if you're interested in digital stuff, a lot of the material I gave to the university was in digital format, and so I still have it. So for example, there's a number of, a lot of material that we created at the AIDS committee, I have in digital form, and as well as some of the recordings from Thunder Gay magazine.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I want to remind everybody, we're not just interested in stuff about organizations and broader scope, but even as stories as individuals, because often that, David as a autobiographer knows that, those individual stories, those personal journeys, those are the things that really...
We documented our lives, and sadly, in some of our, family photographs of chosen family, our members who are no longer with us because of AIDS, there was a generation of elders who are no longer here with us. And so who are left, we have to pass, our stories on, to the younger generation. My artwork frequently deals with myth, and myth and story is a way to, carry information on to the next generation. And that's what I do with my queer art. But yes, I have, photographs like, chosen family photographs from, the 80s and 90s. That are significant in the fact that, that generation is gone. There's so many, missing people.
Yeah, and so, just don't know how to start the sentence. Building on that, Michel, is that, why I wanted to do this event is that we had the opportunity in Black History Month to actually learn a little bit more about women, Black women leaders, business owners here in Thunder Bay. And I think as a Black person, and when we have different communities that face oppression, colonization at blanket, but the enforcement of that through different structures across the world is very different. And when I hear, and I think about the risk they took, like to say, I'm here, I'm young, I'm dumb, I'll say whatever. Yeah. I don't have a mortgage. I love that. Now thinking back, it's like, I don't know if I can go up those stairs. And bravo, but the persecution still, right? It's like when we talk about language of discrimination and the impact that it has, it's even like the stigma against mental health. Like they'll use slang like crazy or that kind of stuff, or even the persecution. Like I can't hide the fact that I'm Black. Society decided that for me as soon as I came out, because the philosophy or debate of social constructs. But we have people that are like refugee status from different countries that could still die today. We had that issue, Donna. I don't know if you're still on the webinar, just stretching your legs, but like when we were on the board a couple years ago, there was threats about the Pride celebration and the parade here in Thunder Bay. That's when Pride Boys and the white supremacist group was kind of, that was put out to the community. It's probably there for a while. And I was thinking to myself, I was just like, you know what? Regardless of how I identify, I like at the biggest target, loudest, Black, pride woman that's there. And so it's just, I really, again, thank you for having this, because you know what? We talk now about education around pronouns and identity. And that's kind of been the loudest noise when there's so much still to be done. And why are we having a discussion about pronouns? Because gosh darn it, holy heck, by having that discussion, like I know I can feel at home with myself, because there's more people out there like me that may not fit into a category, but the fluidity, the recognition that when we think about identities, bisexuality, pan, asexual, it gives breath. But still, even with that, and one might see that as progress, we think about trans rights and the persecution worldwide that the community experiences. So I don't know where I was wrapping with that, but I'm just in awe, and I'm just really happy to be involved in this event and to see the museum make a move. And Scott, I loved how when we talked about developing exhibits, because we're talking about a local Black history exhibit as well. Point of interest, fun fact, one of the first millionaires, Black woman. Point of interest, fun fact, first person killed or charged with first degree murdered and hung, Black person, but it's very clear she was framed and whatnot, documented. And so when you, like Scott, I think history doesn't happen in parallel. It happens together, right? And so having these conversations, being a part of this, well, thank you. So I'll stop there, because we're coming back. But Michelle, I saw your mic come on and off. So David, sorry.
I just wanted to acknowledge my privilege as a white male, because that has been something that's certainly made things easier for me, even back in the early days. And maybe I should share this until we start, but there's a quote that I like to use when I'm talking to people. Suzanne Farr wrote a book in 1997 called Homophobia, A Weapon of Sexism. And there's a little quote in that, well, I included it in my book, but it's virtually impossible to view one oppression in isolation, because all oppressions are connected. They are linked by a common origin, economic power and control, and by common methods of limiting, controlling, and destroying lives. There is no hierarchy of oppression. Each is terrible and destructive. To eliminate one oppression successfully, a movement has to work to eliminate them all, or success will always be limited and incomplete.
Yeah, and how do you? So we're gonna get into some more deeper questions about what you've seen, what you've experienced, and I want to talk about the lateral violence, that happens within communities. I want to talk about, for me, I think about grassroots movements, and I remember hearing this quote. It mentioned that almost, if we look at history, modern grassroots movements about rights and equality has started with Black women. Talking about that, and we talk about feminism, right? And I bring that up because it's true. It speaks to that. I'm going to need you to get that quote, because we're going to get back, folks. 2 minutes, 2-minute calling. That if it's not all, it's still none. It's just the experience and how it's still delivered. So I'm going to ask some questions that maybe I didn't send out to you previous, but definitely want to hear your thoughts about where we are and where we're going. That's your 2-minute warning, panelists, for that. Oh, and Donna, I don't know if you caught this. Actually, you know what? I'm going to save this. I'll do a summary of our little chat or whatnot as the intro, and bring up that Thunder Pride risk that happened when we were planning Pride that one year. Yeah. Okay, welcome back. I shut off my camera for dramatic effect and also to signal the segment. So for our panelists, welcome back. Our attendees, I hope you stretched your legs, got what you needed to keep on keeping on with us. And I don't know if anyone hung out during the break. So the one thing about this session is that it's recorded. And there were some pretty cool conversations that naturally happen. And so if you missed it, make sure you stick around after the previews to see what they do now in movies. But I wanted to recap a little bit. And so and I'm just going to share kind of what I shared because yeah, we'll go from there. And David, please share your quote. Is I was mentioning or discussing how when listening it seems like there's progress being made, and why we have like sessions like this is because right now we're having a conversation in society, mainstream, whatever, public, about pronouns, that kind of stuff, the why, how comes, whatnot, and to understand that there needs to be an understanding of where we've come and still need to go, right? And so for me, it's like there are still people that are persecuted, killed all over the world, that get refugee status and support, amnesty in certain countries simply because of their sexual orientation. And the fact that the legalization or the recognition of gay marriage or same-sex union, 2005. The fact that we're talking about protests and like this is in our timeline, and so it's our lifetime, and it seems like there's progress, but still that persecution, the threats that legitimately exist, considering who people are. And I was briefly talking, I don't know if people know, but when the Thunder Pride Association expanded the parade, we had more people involved in it and whatnot. There was a couple things happening in the community. There were legitimate threats. I was part of the board at that time, to organizers that white supremacist groups could potentially cross the border or be in the community as they already were to cause harm. And there were incidents that year in Canada, of people being attacked. And we're talking 2010s plus. And so to have the conversation about, people are not understanding and hung up on things like identity and pronouns, people are being killed because of identity and pronouns today. And so I made the comment about, society, being Black is something that I can't hide, right? It is what it is. Love it. And my experience of systemic oppression and persecution is we've heard it, we've seen it, but it's still, and I don't know how to describe this, is the fact that people of all colonized people are dying, and we're still having these conversations, and these atrocities are happening, especially with the 2S LGBTQ population, and how much work has to go. So I rambled there a little bit. Check out the video in the previews. It was much better, the first cut, our conversation. But then David shared a quote, and please, if you wouldn't mind getting us started, because we're going to jump into some more conversation with the quote that you shared before. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. You'd think after doing Zoom this long, I'd know better. At any rate, there's a quote that I found many years ago, and it's from a book by Suzanne Farr, who wrote the book called Homophobia, A Weapon of Sexism. It was written in 1997. And it was just a quote that seemed to sum things up. It's virtually impossible to view one oppression in isolation because all oppressions are connected. They're linked by a common origin, economic power and control, and by common methods of limiting, controlling, and destroying lives. There is no hierarchy of oppression. Each is terrible and destructive. To eliminate one oppression successfully, a movement has to work to eliminate them all, or success will always be limited and incomplete.
Wow. Yeah. There are no words. And that quote resonates for me, especially because, again, I think about the different ways that colonization and systemic oppression is enforced depending on the marginalized individual or community and whatnot. And so we talked, sorry, I have cats that will just like, go away, sorry. Edit that part out, please, in the final video. So we talked about your journey. You shared some stories, your experiences. We talked about context, legislation, movements, and now we're talking today. And so with the journey of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, legislation, groups to belong to, being able to be out, where we are, and thinking about the community itself. I want to talk about, and especially off that quote, lateral violence that sometimes happens within oppressed communities. And when I say the term lateral violence, I think of Marsha P. Johnson. I think about our trans community. I think about, Two-Spirited now being talked about. I think about, timelines of maybe awareness and acknowledgement. And so rights, movements, all of that together, where we've been, where you've come through, where we are now, where do you, it's almost like if you could give yourself a piece of suggestion when you were starting your activism, what would you say? But where do you see us needing to go? Where do you foresee some challenges for all of us to unite and move forward? What are you currently focusing your time on? What are the next steps in your activism? Considering the groundwork that's been laid. Heavy questions, yes. But what is your insight to the future? Who would like to be thrown under the bus first? Michel. Perfect.
Hi there, I'm back. Okay, so what I'm currently doing, I'm currently using my artwork as a means to convey thought and ideas. So I realize how powerful it is when I get interviewed by reporters, etc., that I can, choose a subject like, my mother's Indian day school, or the 60 Scoop, or, like the kids I went to high school with, like who were 60 Scoopers. I can choose to make artwork about those events, and it educates. Like I recently had a conversation with, in the last couple of years, with the director of the AGO. He had no idea what the 60 Scoop was. Mind you, he's American. And he told me that that art piece that dealt with that was my strongest piece. And I couldn't help but think it was strong to him because he learned something from it. And now I'm understanding the power of art and the power that it brings a conversation to people who sometimes it would otherwise not be a part of, or who would not be a part of this conversation. And so building bridges, I mean, the future, like we have to teach our youth about, themselves. And then we need to, bridge, communities. Like communities of faith right now are kind of under fire because of the residential school system. And so there's a lot of anger in the community right now. And I think we need to have firm legislation. We need to, hold our governments, like the colonial powers, accountable. We can't let them. The status quo has got us, only so far. And I think right now, this revolution of Zoom, this pandemic world that we've been living in, is a revolution. And there's less, there are less, patience with intolerance. Right now, I am incredibly grateful for the youth living their authentic lives, and to tear down colonialism, and you see it everywhere, and I cheer it on. I don't have a great back anymore to protest, but I went to the Black Lives Matter protest here in town because I had to. It is wonderful to see that the society change before our eyes, but we have this connection now through Zoom, and it's working. We have less patience. The internet is, we have less tolerance for intolerance, and so I see the future as progressing and possibly getting better.
Well, we did make it through 2020 allegedly, so only up from here. David, your insights. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm at an age where being out on the streets is not something I tend to want to do, but I've been involved with Lakehead Unitarian Fellowship for since about 2005. But even so, for me, I've been focusing more on a kind of spiritual journey, if you want to call it that. The fact is that the fellowship is really, it is a community of faith, but it is very different from most. There is no creed or anything like that. We operate with a set of principles. One of them is the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and another one is the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. So right from those principles, it's a thing that fits in with all the work it's like a follow-up from the things we've done. The fellowship was one of the third Unitarian congregation in the country to become a welcoming congregation back in 1995, and then in 2011 we redid it to include trans issues, which hadn't been included in the first time around. And I mean, that was one of the things that really worried or kind of made me most uncomfortable when I was working with the AIDS committee, was that I would get calls periodically from trans individuals, and at that time there was nothing. I had nothing to offer them, and I'd say, well, if somebody else makes contact, I'll try and hook you up and connect you with somebody else, and it never seemed to work out. So the things that have been happening, in the last decade, really, has been fantastic. But in recent years, at the fellowship, for example, we did a study group on truth, healing, and reconciliation, and that's part of of what we're operating on. And right now, the Canadian Unitarian Council is undergoing a process to add an 8th principle, calling us to accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions. So the stuff that we're doing is really ties in with this, and so my hope is that in the way because I do a monthly service, at least for the last couple of years, and so I hope that by sharing ideas with people, that it helps to get other people thinking along the lines of progress and making change in the world. So that's really where I've been heading, and I pay close attention to, or try to pay close attention to, what is happening with everything that's going on, even though I'm not, it allows me to keep in touch with the trends and everything that's happening, so that I can share that with people as much as possible.
Thank you. And Donna, we have a couple questions, but for you, your insight based on your experience and involvement, thoughts about what you see to help us move forward, challenges. What do you think?
I'm retiring from the government on June 30th. So after watching government try and, I guess, educate leaders. I work for the Thunder Bay Jail, so different people in the OPS, it was just not working. It was a course that you went click, 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 and you got the credit at the end. And basically you just turned around and did exactly what you did before you took the course. So what I would like to do is somehow take these courses, yes, call them education, but make them a feeling, make them part of you, not just something you learn, but something you are, if that makes sense. And that will probably take me to my grave trying to figure that one out. I'm going to call on Michel and David for help on how to get there, but just taking a course or reading a book doesn't make you anything. You have to live it. You have to be it. And I want to be that. I want to be part of that be and not just learn, if that makes sense. That's
and it does make perfect sense. Michel, you shared with us your workplace experience, you know, by being out, by being young, by being loud, the perspective shift that parent had over their child coming out as gay or lesbian, or coming out for who they are, right? And so the wife was calmed down, and kind of building on that, it's kind of like when people interact with different people of different races, and it's like, oh, you're not that bad, you're not the rest. And it's like, okay, well, let's talk about microaggression of discriminatory words, but at the same time, you know, contributing to that shift. And so Donna, building on what you were sharing about what you'd like to have implemented in a structure like the one that you're retiring from in 3 days. My question, and we've talked about church participation, we talked about police, you know, the apology on anti-homophobia day, is when we have systems such as police, such as church, and again, it's kind of like, unfortunately, those kind of systems, it's all blanket. We know at the core, the colonization, the racism that's systemic and whatnot. But then when you have pieces of that system, the people, the cogs of the machine, depending on how you're viewed and what system you're part of, how do we move forward? And what are your thoughts about the efforts that, whether it's individuals a part of those systems that are oppressive, like police, like church, like more than oppressive, and some of the backlash or the perspectives you hear that kind of want to make it anti. And so just to kind of handle like that, when police wanted to show up to the Black Lives Matter protest, a lot of individuals, it shifted to an anti-police rally. And being part of supporting the youth that were coordinating that, it was having community conversations saying, one, you know, if they show up, it's not as enforcement or whatnot. And secondly, what is it that we're looking for here? You know, and how, considering, you know, the atrocities that have happened, how do we move forward? You know, what are your suggestions? What are your recommendations, conversations to have? So Michel, I just saw your mic, and then Donna,
I'm chomping at the bit about.
That was a lot of questions in that one statement she had. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, but like, it's how.
So recently, you know, in the last, you know, couple of days, I've seen, you know, police officers with the rainbow police, you know, bulletproof vest. And I can't help but think that, you know, they're making an attempt. At the same time, you know, their inclusion in pride parades all over, you know, is problematic for, you know, BIPOC, you know, racialized, queer communities who are frequently still targeted by the police. And, I include myself in that because 4 years ago, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was holding my boyfriend's hand and we got stopped by the police, questioned, where our ID, and I said, you're stopping us because we're two men holding our hands. And they were like, no, we're not. He. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And so, yeah, we're still frequently targeted. And so when I see, a police, sporting the rainbow police, I just kind of go, there's a certain degree of privilege to have, police, glad handing, the queer community. I've met several white, community members, queer members who are like, oh, homophobia is a thing of the past. And I'm like, you live in a very sheltered world where you think homophobia no longer exists. Because it still exists for racialized communities, or queer communities. Every day we still have to deal with it. So, yeah, I mean, we still need to, I think queer police officers, should be able to march. I don't know if they should be wearing their uniforms. That's where I stand, right? And so, yeah, we still need to have community involvement. I mean, in the 90s, the queer community in Toronto was, having open discussions with the police force in Toronto. Things slightly got better for, those of privilege. And so, yeah, we need to make these inroads. We have to, have more understanding of each other, right? I know I had to chomp at the bit with that, but okay. So I know I digress. Like we can, move on to whatever topic.
No, but that's exactly what what the question was, is, you Dan the man fought the system, yet we're still dictated by archaic systems when there's an attempt to change. What's your reaction, Donna? Sorry.
I would like to just not completely contradict everything you said, but we have to start somewhere. And like David said, it has to be all inclusive. Like the oppression has to be everybody all at the same time, which is almost impossible, but it's got to start. And I do know some queer police officers, and if they're wearing the pride, good for them, because I know they have to go back into that police station and face whatever they have to go to. So if they're willing to walk out their doors and wear it publicly, whether they have a police uniform on, but then I'm coming from a place of privilege as well on this one. So I'm trying to understand, but as Colleen said, how can you tell somebody what you don't know? And I don't know the other side. And I try and put myself in that place, especially working at the jail. I try and understand what's happening. But
And so, Donna, there's a lot of fear. Like when I was arrested for being gay in '93, it was not cool and it was not good, and it traumatized me for years. And so what was good is that the queer community at the university, they, wrapped their arms around me. And actually, Michael Sabota at the AIDS committee, he was there to talk to me, to, help me, sort of process, what had happened to me. But then I still had to, bump into that same police officer at the inner city mall. And, I would cringe, and inside I'm like, that man arrested me for being gay. And there I see him with his granddaughter, buying Christmas gifts. And I'm like angry and frightened at the same time. And so, yeah, I mean, the police have, their imagery, I mean, their uniforms, mean different things to different people. Like I had to teach my son to respect the police, even though they were targeting us, myself and my son, because I was an openly queer man with a small child. The fact that they wouldn't talk to me and they asked my son, is that your father? Like they totally ignored me, right? And the lack of disrespect, or the lack of disrespect, and I was just teaching my son how to use his training wheels. Like, my God, we were outside of Boulevard Park, but I'm like, does my son look apprehended? So my interactions with the police, are different as a two-spirit, out gay male.
Yeah. Appreciate that, Michelle.
Oh yes, and thank you. And sorry, the was to jump right into the next question because I'm hungry for more information and we've got a limited time. So thinking about, the conversation we just had around systems, when I think about shifts in structures that need to be repaired, especially when it comes to systemic racism, for me, it begins with accountability. The system has to keep itself accountable, regardless if there's a fundamental belief shift or not, right? But that's a whole other panel that we can get to later. Our final question for the evening from our Q&A builds off of where you see us going and where we've come. But over the past, and we're going to throw numbers, 20, 10, 5 years, so 5, 10, 20 years. Can you speak to maybe some of the struggles, some of the successes? And we heard a little bit about where you think we might go, but what is your hope? What is your hope for the next 10 years based on your experience with how change happens and where we are now? Because it's not overnight, folks. So struggles, successes that you want to share, and where you hope to be. Michel.
All right, so 10 years. I'm hoping that long-term healthcare facilities will have a gay wing. But baby boomers for years, for like 25 years, have been talking about an aging population going into a homophobic, long-term care facility, and I'm frightened. I'm like, I don't want to hang out with all the straight people who treated me like shit in high school in an old folks home. Sorry. So yeah, I want, all segments of our queer community to be safe, and whether they're old or young, right? And so I look into the future and I see my old age and I go, do I have to prepare myself to be, put up with an onslaught of, discriminatory crap, in my golden years? I don't want to have to deal with that. I have never tolerated it in my youth. I'm certainly not going to tolerate it as I get older. So that's where I'm envisioning a better future, I hope.
Thank you. And David, for you.
Well, in 10 years, I guess I hope I'll still be alive. But actually, one of the things that I did when I was an outreach worker with Rainbow Health Ontario, dealing with aging, in fact, I still have a supply of pamphlets around that. Aging as LGBT, but we did try and do some work with around the community, getting people to be thinking about the issue of aging. I have two things that I think are important. One of them is that it's really important to build bridges between all the different groups that are feeling oppressed, and trying as much as possible to avoid the internecine warfare that can, or lateral violence, I guess, if that's the word. It's something that really needs to be focused, because that's always been there right from the start with me, that people have different perspectives on how to proceed, and we have to give each other room to do the things that need to be done. The other thing that I think is really important is to never become complacent. That you talked about Proud Boys and sort of the whole rise in white supremacist groups and anti-Asian groups, and just all of these forms of oppression. We really have to stay vigilant and work to make sure that these people don't gain any more ground than they have so far. It's the last half dozen years in particular have been especially bad, but that's something I think that we have to be focusing on, to not become complacent, and don't let the bastards grind you down.
Thank you. Donna.
And for myself, I'm with Age Friendly Thunder Bay, and I am advocating the whole time, like, okay, you're saying the premise is that they want people to stay home, and I'm saying, and my wife and I, are we allowed to go into St. Joe's Heritage? And it's pretty much crickets on that one. So I'm promoting that way. Rebecca Johnson runs that group. So that's where I'm starting, and always going to join something else, whatever I can find. Right,
Awesome.
Jesse?
Amazing. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists, Donna, Michel, David, your insights, your stories, your fight. Thank you. And thank you for being a part of tonight. Thank you, Rainbow Collective and Thunder Bay Museum, as well as GenNext, for working together to put this panel on. It will be recorded. You can catch it. You can review it. Again, that break conversation was great. Break. And so I invite our panelists to say any final words before we conclude tonight, and as well as Scott or Jesse as well.
Excellent job. I'm so thankful that I am so glad to be part of it. Keep up the good work, and I can't wait to see what's coming next.
I'll say ditto. And thanks to all of you for all that you've been doing. So thank you for this.
I have to, echo everyone's sentiment, but at the same time, I am so grateful for a younger generation of activists to pick up the torch. We have carried that torch for years, and we will still, carry our share as we get older, as you can hear from, Donna and David's, current, activities. I am grateful because my back can't really hold that torch much longer. I have to do my own little thing, but I am so glad for the younger activists who get it, who understand. I love you all.
Go ahead, Scott. I'll jump in after you.
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you to all the panelists, and especially thank you for Jesse and Colleen for helping pull this together. This has been a very wonderful evening and really special to help our members and the community, learn more and to cure some of the ignorance that's out there. It's really been great.
Yeah, I'll start with the thanks like everybody else. Thank you so much for our panelists who joined us tonight. Thank you to Scott and the rest of the museum for just kind of, I think, really put the bug in our ear to get something going. And for Colleen, we've now partnered together for a couple things. It's been great. And for bringing in GenNext. I did write down where the three of you want to go. And I'm really excited because those building bridges is part of what this week has all been about in terms of this education we started on Tuesday around racism, bringing in members of the Black community and Indigenous community and having those discussions. Yesterday around accessibility, having discussions with various people with disabilities and what our community needs to look like. And then today, really jumping into that history so we can, that's going to be the best way to educate the community going forward is this is where we came from. This is why we're doing what we're doing. And don't forget who started these movements because they didn't look like me. And then just touching on long-term care, I think those are conversations that I actually had the privilege of having being redeployed at the beginning to our city long-term care facility. And we did some education with the staff and we held what I'm not the greatest at history. So what I believe was the first Pride Parade locally in long-term care. So we are starting to see that whether everybody knew what was going on or not, it was such a great day. So I really do see those same needs. And just a quick plug about what's coming up. So you heard where we were this week. We are not done with the education, but gonna dial back a little bit for this week, and we're gonna get into the fun. So Saturday from 1 to 4 is the first in-person Pride event since 2019. Join Rainbow Collective at Boulevard Lake for a fun afternoon of mini putt. This is at Play It Forward Funland. So again, you pay what you can. So, if you can't afford to play, somebody else will help you out there. Please do show up. There will be music and treats for everyone who comes. And you're sick of hearing, please follow all health rules and have fun. And then Sunday, we're going to be at Boomers, 7 p.m. So Boomers Drive-In. Just outside of town. We're going to be showing Death Becomes Her. This movie is PG-13. If features Meryl Streep, Goldie Hawn, and Bruce Willis. Tickets are available on Boomer's website. So I believe it's $25 a car, but we're going to have door prizes of over $700. So again, thank you to everybody who came. Thank you to everybody who is part of this discussion. And this will not be the last discussion that we have.
So essentially, keep doing what you do. Keep being you, boo. Be there or be square. Safe practices. And thank you for being along with us in this journey, where we are, where we've come from, and where we're going. So we bid you adieu. Night, everyone. Thank you.